What makes this gag work? Or this one. What makes something funny? At the heart of every form of comedy is a subversion of the expected, an incongruity between what we, the audience of the joke, thinks will occur and what actually does. The setup leads the audience in one direction, and the punchline is the clever twist that makes a fool out of the characters in the story or the audience themselves. Let's look at parody. Parody can be defined as an imitation of the style of a particular writer, artist, or genre with deliberate exaggeration for comic effect. Or as Mel Brooks said, do what they did except just stretch it half an inch. Audiences are acutely aware of the tropes within genres and accept these tropes as normal and expected. By exaggerating the recognizable techniques and signs that audiences are accustomed to, the masters of parody poke fun at cinema with a hilarious precision. This presentation will take a look at selected works from legendary parody artists Mel Brooks and the director trio of Jerry and David Zucker and Jim Abrams. The Western genre, with its gripping tales of the outlaws and morally ambiguous heroes, was a staple of American cinema. The prime of America's favorite movie type stretched from the 1930s to the 1950s and began to taper off in the 60s. Westerns epitomized the American value systems on the screen. The righteous hero embodies on a code of ethics that is rooted in American philosophies, which can be seen as the hero fights for the rights of the everyman. Wrongdoers and corruption are the enemy, and the confident adventurer calls himself to action, mostly on goodwill alone. On the other hand, the Western also antagonizes minority characters, another trait inherent in American ideology during the prime of this genre. Mel Brooks came out guns blazing with his Western spoof, Blazing Saddles, in the year 1974. Co-authored by Mel Brooks and Richard Pryor, Blazing Saddles takes place on the late 19th century frontier. The progression of the story follows the classic Western narrative. The basic formula of the Western tale is there, but Brooks reshapes it in ways that range from subtle to outrageous. From the very beginning, Brooks takes the familiar signs and creates a new meaning which signifies that this movie isn't to be taken seriously. The opening credits show the vast landscape of the frontier, a symbol of the American Western. The triumphant folk song, Blazing Saddles, tells of the valor and courage we'll see from our main character. However, the mood of the opening is dictated by the hilarious whipping sound effects that play throughout. The characters in Blazing Saddles are basically caricatures of caricatures, slight variations on the characters we have seen before in other westerns. We have the brave sheriff, the legendary gunslinger with a dark past, the malicious but sophisticated man of authority who may be too educated.
My mind is a raging torrent, flooded with rivulets of thought, cascading into a waterfall of creative alternatives.
God darn it, Mr. Lamar. You use your tongue prettier than a $20 whore.
And the strong-willed prostitute. Each of these stock characters are unique in how they differ from their real Western genre counterparts. Bart breaks convention with his race, and 19th century racial tension is the backbone of the whole movie. The Waco Kid's skills are literally ridiculous and unreal.
1, 2, 3.
Lily Von Stupp, played wonderfully by Madeline Kahn, performs a number that laments the job of a prostitute. The song I'm So Tired gives the audience a hilarious but, in a way, realistic perspective on the familiar Western character.
Everything below the waist is kaput.
He likes to remind the audience that they are in a movie and that we are in on the joke with them. The end of Blazing Saddles strips the grandiose quality from the image by holding on the shot just a little longer than a normal Western. Brooks takes this familiarity to the point of excess. He uses tropes of whatever genre he is parodying and plays them to the point of absurdity. In horror films, the whinnying of horses and the crack of lightning at the mention of a name is an easily recognizable trope. However, in Young Frankenstein, Brooks plays up the whinnying and the lightning at the mention of Frau Brüher every time someone says her name. By the third crack of lightning, the audience understands how ridiculous the trope is.
I am Frau Blücher.
Brooks thinks tropes are silly and wants us to laugh at them too. Direct comparison is another of the ways Brooks creates his puns in Young Frankenstein.
Alive! It's alive! It's alive!
By making small, subtle tweaks to the originals he parodies, he is able to make a joke out of thin air.
Werewolf.
Werewolf?
There. What? Werewolf.
In the original Frankenstein, when Fritz goes to steal a brain for the doctor, he scares himself, drops the brain, and selects a new one from a jar labeled abnormal brain. In Young Frankenstein, Igor does the same. Except his jar has a subheading to point out the obvious: do not use. Brooks makes a mockery out of the hunchbacked assistant trope.
Dr. Frankenstein.
Brilliantly acted, Marty Feldman's Igor is endearing, loyal, and bordering on incompetent.
You know, I don't mean to embarrass you, but I'm a rather brilliant surgeon. Perhaps I could help you with that hump.
What hump?
Let's go.
Mel Brooks uses Igor as our comedic gateway. His fourth wall breaks connect the fantasy of the world of the story to us, the audience.
I ain't got no body, and nobody cares for me.
He is not to be taken seriously every second that he is in the scene, which makes him so
How did you
likable.
get here?
Call it a hunch from cheap.
This parody works so smoothly in Brooks's films because he creates a story that doesn't have consequences unless he wills it. Under the guise of jokes, no actions truly matter unless the characters are positioned to deal with it again later. In Young Frankenstein, the creature vaults a young girl off of a seesaw, flying into the air. A simple scene just for laughs. Whereas in the original Frankenstein, the scene of the creature and the young girl's murder serves to rally the mob and move the action of the movie. Brooks only makes consequences in his worlds when he has to, because consequences ruin the punchline. Some parody functions as a critique of an entire genre, while others have a tighter scope on the source material they're spoofing. Airplane, written and directed by the Zucker-Abrams-Zucker filmmaking trio in 1980, is a fascinating example of parody because while in many ways it parodies disaster films as a broader genre, many of the specifics of the film are pulled sometimes verbatim from one specific film, 0 Hour. The films were so close that, despite parody laws in place, the Zuckers were encouraged by their lawyers to option the rights to 0 Hour, just in case.
Joey, here's something we give our special visitors. You like to have it?
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Sure. You ever been in a cockpit before?
No, sir, I've never been up in a plane before.
You ever seen a grown man naked?
By pulling so directly from the source material, the writers were able to fully use Brooks's idea, stretching half an inch. Unlike films like Blazing Saddles, Airplane didn't have to rely on the audience having previous knowledge of any tropes or 0 Hour's plot, since the movie includes any context necessary to understand its jokes. When writing comedy, the search for a punchline is often the search for the irony in a specific situation. In Airplane, the writers took core scenes and lines from 0 Hour and simply found the irony within those moments. Take this scene, for example.
Would you care for a drop, madam? Certainly not.
In the context of a serious film, this is a dramatic moment where a man tries to cope with his fear of death through drinking and company, much to the disgust of the older woman. What would be the obvious irony here?
Would you like a little whiskey, man?
Certainly not.
Of course, these characters are never revisited, and there are no consequences of this gag. In fact, none of the jokes in Airplane have consequences, or fully exist in reality. The main plot revolves around disaster, but the characters are constantly creating chaos that never actually has any impact.
He's coming right at us!
Coming in too hot!
The absurdity and surrealism of Airplane's jokes are in direct contrast with the sober groundedness of 0 Hour's plot. The writers constructed the film very meticulously, making sure that every element of the movie was played as seriously as possible to make the jokes land that much harder.
It's an entirely different kind of flying, altogether.
It's an entirely different kind of flying.
During the pre-production of Airplane, Paramount continuously pushed the directors to cast famous comedic actors like Bill Murray or Chevy Chase. But the directing trio insisted on hiring actors that had long-standing careers in dramas. As Jim Abrams put it, the key to the whole Airplane concept and to our shared sense of humor was to do everything straight, so we did.
What was it we had for dinner tonight?
Well, we had a choice, steak, fish.
Yes, I remember I had lasagna.
So what makes a parody work? Ultimately, it always has to come from a place of familiarity. Jerry Zucker said, "To do satire in something that doesn't exist, that's a rule broken." To create satire is to rework the familiar and push it to the absurd, reconfigure signs to fit the surrealist comedic narrative. Do what they did, except just stretch it half an inch.